By the time a week had passed, it was like Willa had been part of the house for years. She didn't speak more than necessary, but she kept the place running smoother than I ever had. The boys were eating 3 meals a day. Tess had stopped flinching at sudden noises, and I'd even found myself reaching for clean shirts again instead of the same stained flannel. Every morning, Willa was up before the sun, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled, already at the stove. The scent of frying bacon or warm biscuits filled the house, a reminder of a time I thought was gone for good. She never asked questions about the ranch, never offered advice, just worked, quiet and steady, like a heartbeat you stop noticing until it's gone. Tess was different. She barely spoke at all. She followed her mother like a shadow, always close, always watching. When she wasn't clinging to Willa's skirt, she sat outside with Harlan near the chicken coop, silent and wide-eyed, clutching that ragged cloth doll. One afternoon, I found the two of them crouched behind the woodshed, feeding breadcrumbs to a bluebird with a crooked wing. Harlan had a stick poked in the dirt, drawing figures. Tess was just sitting there, still as a stone, like she didn't want to frighten the moment away. "She don't laugh much," Harlan said to me later, "but she listens real close." That sat with me. I'd known men who survived wars and came back quieter than they left. Tess had that same kind of silence. Emmett wasn't as quick to warm up. At 13, he watched people like he was sizing them up in a poker game. He'd already seen what loss could do. Clara's death had hardened something in him I hadn't known how to reach. One evening, while Willa was fixing supper, Emmett pulled me aside out by the barn. "She's hiding something," he said, arms crossed tight across his chest. "Nobody shows up out of nowhere with a kid and no horse unless they're running." I leaned against the post, watching the smoke curl out from the chimney. "Maybe she is," I said. "You're not worried?" "Course I'm worried." "Then why'd you let her stay?" I looked at him then. Really looked. He had Clara's stare, sharp and stubborn. "Because sometimes folks need a place to catch their breath, Emmett. Doesn't mean they're trouble. Just means they've had it." He didn't like that answer, but he didn't argue either. Later that night, I saw the bruise. Willa had reached up to grab a skillet from the hook, and her sleeve slipped back just enough to show the yellowing edge of something old and painful on her wrist. She froze when she caught me looking. Didn't speak, just tugged her sleeve down and kept going. I didn't press her, but it burned under my ribs. She made apple cobbler that night. First real dessert the boys had tasted in months. They scraped their bowls clean, even Emmett, though he didn't smile. After dinner, I stayed behind while she washed up. "You can tell me if someone's looking for you," I said gently. Her hands didn't pause in the dishwater, but her shoulders stiffened. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said. "I just needed someplace safe." "Is Tess in danger?" She shook her head slowly. "Not while I'm breathing." It wasn't the answer I wanted, but it was the one that told me everything I needed to know. We said nothing more. She finished cleaning, dried her hands, and walked past me without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, a blanket over my legs, my old dog, Birch, curled at my feet. The moon was thin, silvered like an old coin, and the land stretched quiet all the way to the horizon. I heard a sound from the house, soft, like a whimper. I rose, moved to the window by the spare room. Tess was sitting up in bed, eyes open, her doll clutched tight. Her mouth moved soundlessly, like she was whispering in a dream. Then came the words, barely audible through the glass. "Don't let him find us." I stepped back. There it was. The confirmation I hadn't asked for. Whoever they were running from, they hadn't escaped him yet. And suddenly, I realized something deeper than fear had rooted itself in me. I wasn't just worried about the trouble that might follow them. I was worried what I'd have to become to keep it from crossing my land. Boone came back 3 days later, this time riding straight up the trail like he owned the land. A deputy rode behind him, younger, nervous-looking, keeping his eyes on the barn instead of the house. I stood on the porch before they could knock, one hand resting on the post, the other near the Henry rifle propped behind the door. "Afternoon again," Boone said, his voice slow and smug. "Didn't figure I need to come twice, but seems I do." He didn't wait for an invite. Just stepped closer, boots crunching over gravel. The deputy lagged behind. "I got the paper," he continued, pulling it from his coat. "Signed and sealed by Judge Tiller over in Dry Rock. Says that child is to be returned to her rightful kin me." Willa stood just behind the screen door. I didn't have to turn and know she was holding Tess to her side. The girl's fingers curled in her mother's dress, face half hidden. "You went judge shopping," I said. "Tiller's been bought and sold more times than a saloon mirror. The paper don't carry weight out here." Boone's jaw twitched. "You really want to make this hard?" "She ain't your blood," I said, low and even. "And she sure as hell ain't your property. I got the authority to take her by force if I must." "Try it," I said, stepping off the porch. "See how that ends." He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, waiting for me to fold. When I didn't, he shifted his attention to the deputy. "Well," he barked, "aren't you going to do your job?" The deputy looked between us, then down at his boots. "Mr. Merrick's right. That paper won't hold up here. We're outside Tiller's jurisdiction, and more in that this don't feel right." Boone's eyes burned. "You coward. You ride back to town," I told the deputy. "Tell Sheriff Coulter what's happening. He'll want to hear about false claims and forged papers." The deputy gave a slight nod and turned his horse. Boone stood there a long moment, fists clenched at his sides, hate rolling off him like smoke off green firewood. "This ain't over," he growled. "You're right," I said. "It's just beginning. But next time, you don't ride in here with paper. You come with a fight, you'll get one." He mounted up and rode off, not fast, not slow, just deliberate, like a man who'd been humiliated but wasn't finished yet. I watched him go until he vanished beyond the ridge. Then I turned back to the house. Willa was still in the doorway, pale but steady. Tess clung to her side, silent, her doll pressed to her chest. I walked over and crouched down, eye to eye with the girl. "You're safe here," I said softly. "Ain't no man going to take you from your mama. Not while I draw breath." Tess didn't speak, but for the first time since she arrived, she reached out and placed her small hand on my arm. It was enough. That night, the house was quieter than usual. Even the boys kept their voices down. Emmett sat near the fire, sharpening his knife in slow, careful strokes. Harlan and Tess played marbles on the rug, whispering and giggling under their breath. Willa brought in a plate of warm cornbread and set it down in front of me. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "You don't need to," I said. "I do," she replied, "for standing between us and him, for not asking for anything in return." I looked at her, really looked. The shadows of her past hadn't disappeared, but they'd lightened somehow. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to live again. "I didn't do it for nothing," I said, cracking a smile. "You make a damn fine cobbler. Hard to give that up." She laughed, soft, surprised, and it filled the room like spring after a long freeze. As the fire crackled low, I sat back and listened to the sounds of life. The children, the dog snoring under the table, the creak of old wood settling for the night. It struck me then, this wasn't just about keeping Willa and Tess safe. This was about building something again. Slowly, carefully, from pieces. Later, as I climbed the stairs, Emmett followed behind, quiet as ever. "You mean to keep them here?" he asked. I paused. "If they want to stay," I said. "Yeah, I do." He nodded once, then turned into his room without another word. That was his way of saying he agreed. Out the window, the stars hung over the land like a promise. Not of peace, necessarily, but of direction. A reason to keep going. We weren't out of the woods. Boone would come back, and next time, he might bring more than forged paper. But the difference now was simple. We were ready. We were no longer just a rancher and a house guest. We were something like family. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that kind of bond was worth protecting. The change around the ranch was subtle at first. Morning started earlier, with the scent of biscuits and coffee replacing the usual smell of dust and sweat. Tess had begun to hum, barely audible, more like a breeze than a song. But it was there, threading its way through the house as she helped Willa shell peas or fed the hens with Harlan. I'd grown used to the sound of Willa's boots on the floorboards, the steady scrape of her knife on the cutting board, the rhythm of her voice telling the children stories while they peeled apples. There was a kind of peace in it all. But even as the days lengthened and the air warmed, something inside me stayed sharp-edged. Then, late one afternoon, I spotted a figure talking to the stable hand over at Miller's General. He was tall, dressed in black, with a bad-shaped pale patch on his vest where a star might have been once. I didn't need to hear the words. I could feel in my gut that was Boone Maddox. I waited until he rode off, then headed inside. Miller confirmed it. He'd been asking about a woman and child matching Willa and Tess's description. Said he was family. Said he had legal rights. Miller hadn't told him much, but that didn't matter. Boone was close. When I got back to the ranch, the sky was heavy with that strange gold of late spring, calm, beautiful, deceptive. Willa was standing in the yard, pulling clothes off the line. Tess played with Harlan, dragging a stick through the dirt in wide circles. I walked over slowly, the weight of what I had to say dragging behind each step. She looked at me once and knew. Her fingers dropped the clothespin. "He's here," she asked, voice low. I nodded. "Was asking in town." "He's not far." Tess had stopped moving. She wasn't looking at us, but I knew she was listening. "We can go," Willis said suddenly. "Tonight. Just take the trail south." "You're not running anymore?" I said firm. "Not from him. Not from anyone." She looked at me, fear fighting with disbelief in her eyes. "You don't know what he's like." "I don't have to," I said. "I've seen enough in this life to recognize poison, and I've got no intention of letting it take root here." She said nothing, but her throat worked as she swallowed hard. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat with me by the fire, her hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking from. "When my husband died," she said, voice barely above a whisper, Boone was already circling. Said the law didn't mean much when there was a child involved. Claimed he could give her a real future. But what he wanted wasn't about Tess. It was about control. About punishing me for leaving a man who couldn't lift a hand without swinging it. Her eyes were glassy in the firelight. I went to a judge once. Asked if there was any way to keep Boone away. But without charges, without proof. "You did what you could," I said. "It wasn't enough," she replied. So I ran, over and over. And every place we landed, I told myself it would be the last. "You're not running anymore," I repeated. "You hear me?" She nodded slowly, but I could see the tremor in her jaw. The next day, I made sure the boys understood without telling them too much. Emmett knew already. He always knew. He started checking the rifle over the mantel without being asked. Harlan watched him, learning without a word. I spent the afternoon repairing the gate to the north pasture. My hands worked while my mind raced. Boone wasn't a man who asked questions twice. If he suspected we were hiding Willa, he'd come knocking with more than words. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Willa brought me a glass of water. I thanked her and watched Tess running in the field, her hair catching the light. "You said once I make a damn fine cobbler," Willa said, voice gentle. I looked over at her. "I've been thinking about planting peaches out back. Figure it might be nice to have something sweet that's ours." I stared at her a long moment, the way her eyes didn't waver, the way she stood there without apology. She wasn't asking for permission. She was offering hope. "Then let's make sure it gets planted," I said. Behind her, Tess laughed, full and real. It was the first time I'd heard it, but the sound hadn't even faded before I spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon. A rider approaching fast. I stood, hand brushing the handle of my belt knife. It was Boone, and he wasn't coming to talk. The wind carried the scent of rain and dust as I stepped out onto the porch, rubbing the ache from my shoulder. The sky over the ridge glowed orange, settling into that quiet moment before night swallows everything. I just fed the stock, scolded Harlan for chasing the chickens barefoot again, and burned the beans for supper. Again, I wasn't made for domesticity. My wife, Clara, used to laugh and say I was built for saddles and storms, not stoves and spoons. She'd been gone near 2 years now, taken in one of those fevers that show up quick and leave nothing but grief behind. I didn't hire a cook after her. Couldn't stand the idea of someone else filling her space in the kitchen. But grief wears down even the stubborn. The boys were thinning out, and I caught Emmett scraping mold off bread like it was nothing. So when the knock came, soft, just 3 taps, I didn't move right away. Folks didn't come calling at sundown, and when they did, it was rarely with good news. I opened the door slow, thumb resting on the edge of the frame. There she stood, slim, dusty from travel, dark hair tied back with a strip of red cloth, and eyes that didn't flinch under mine. "I was told you need a cook," she said. She had a child with her, a girl, maybe 6 or 7, clutching her skirt with one hand and holding a threadbare cloth doll with the other. Her eyes were large and too quiet for a child. I looked past them to the fading road. No wagon, no horse, just two sets of prints in the dust. "Who told you that?" I asked. "Someone in town. Fella at the mercantile. I was looking for work." "And he pointed you here?" She nodded. "Said you'd lost help. That you've got two boys and a half-empty pantry." I didn't like how much truth that held. The townsfolk meant well, but I'd never asked anyone to send me a stranger. "What's your name?" I asked. "Willa Dorsey." She said it steady, chin slightly raised. The girl leaned behind her, half hiding. "This here's my daughter, Tess." Tess blinked up at me. That same silence carved into her face. I could see the edge of a bruise at her collarbone, faint and fading, but it raised my hackles just the same. I exhaled slowly. I wasn't in the habit of inviting unknowns across my threshold, especially women traveling alone with a child. That kind of desperation comes with history, and history has a habit of spilling into your life whether you ask for it or not. But the air had shifted somehow, like the house had been holding its breath and let it out when they stepped close. "You any good?" I asked. "Better than hungry boys deserve," she said, and something near a smile flickered on her lips. Behind me, Harlan peeked around the doorway, eyes wide and curious. Emmett wasn't far behind, arms crossed and suspicious. That boy guarded his world like a soldier. "All right," I said at last. "One night. We'll see." Willa nodded once, not grateful, just accepting. She didn't beg. She stepped in like she belonged, guiding Tess through the door with a hand on her back. She found a kitchen like she'd always known it. Without asking, she peeled off her gloves, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work, checking what was left in the pantry, sniffing at jars, inspecting the cast iron like she'd been raised on it. I stood in the doorway and watched her. It unsettled me. How quickly the place felt different. Not just occupied, but alive. Tess sat at the kitchen table without a word, tracing the cracks in the wood with her fingertip. She didn't speak, didn't smile. Harlan slid into the seat across from her with a plate of apples and offered one. She stared at it, then took it slowly, like she was waiting to be told no. That night, we had cornbread, beans with actual flavor, and a stew that didn't taste like boot leather. The boys ate like wolves, and Willa barely touched hers. "Don't like your own cooking?" I asked. She shrugged. "Don't eat much at night. Never sits well." Later, when the boys were tucked into their loft, I leaned on the doorframe and watched her wash the dishes by lantern light. Her hands moved with practiced rhythm, not rushed, not lazy. She didn't hum. She didn't talk. "You been traveling long?" I asked. "A while," she said without turning. "Where from?" She hesitated just a beat too long. "West." There was more. I didn't ask. When she finished, she dried her hands and finally looked at me straight. "We'll sleep out in the barn. Just for tonight. No need. You and the girl take the small room off the parlor. It's got a bed and a lock." Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, weighing. "Thank you." She led Tess down the hallway, her boots quiet on the old wood floor. I heard the soft click of the door shutting, then silence. I stood there a while longer, staring into the kitchen. The clean counters, the scent of warm bread still in the air, the two empty bowls stacked neat beside the sink. Something had changed, and, though I didn't know what brought them to my door, I had the sinking feeling whatever it was might come knocking again.